Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with Michael Ammar. Michael is a true legend in the world of magic. His magic is absolutely incredible to this day. He's one of the most prolific magic teachers, and in this episode, he holds nothing back. You're going to learn how he has his own signature pieces and what you can do to make magic that is synonymous with your name. You're going to learn lessons that he still keeps with him to this day from Di Vernon. You're going to learn exactly what he does to select material, both for his performances and for television, which he has some of the best spots in history. You're going to learn how he scripts, and you're going to learn how he innovates in the world of magic business. You're going to love this episode with the legend, the man himself, Michael Ammar. Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and we are here with the one and only, the legendary Michael Ammar. Michael, how are you?
I'm fine, Jonah. Thank you.
I am super excited to have you on this podcast and on an episode. It's no question how influential and legendary you are in the world of not only magic, but also teaching magic and so much. I'm super excited to dive in. What a privilege to have you here. So let's start at the very beginning, as we usually do. How did you get started in magic?
Well, I always liked magic and was attracted to it as a kid. I just never thought that it was something that I could do beyond, simple self-working card tricks. A real turning point was when I was in the ninth grade. A friend at school fooled me with a trick. I pestered him until he taught me how to do it, and it was a little sleight of hand thing. And this friend was a nice enough guy, but he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, and it occurred to me that, well, if this guy can do it, I can do it. And so I began to check books out of the library and things like that, and then discover Magic Inc. as a mail order place and a catalog and stuff like that, and went through the normal course of ordering a few tricks that really sound great in the catalog but turn out to be not that good, and started leaning more towards books as a better value, and just kind of continued to go deeper. The more I discovered other sources, for mail order and things like that. And then eventually a friend took me to a magic convention. It was the 1976 SAM convention in Philadelphia, and that was a real turning point. That really exposed me to just how deep the rabbit hole goes as far as the world of magic is. There was no turning back from there.
It's a big, important moment visiting a magic convention, or just realizing how many more magicians are out there, and that we're not alone in this, but there's loads of other people to help us along, and people working on the exact same things. Help me understand how the journey continued, potentially how it started to become a career for you.
Well, I really became very passionate about it and practiced a lot. And I was just off to college and did a lot of rehearsals in colleges and performances locally in colleges. And when I graduated, I never thought I was going to do it for a living. I always thought I was just going to I would get a job. My family had a steakhouse in Bluefield, and I came back and started working at the steakhouse. In just a few months, came to realize that I really didn't like that, working in a Bonanza Steakhouse. It just so clearly wasn't fun the way that magic was fun. A real turning point was on Mother's Day, which was the busiest day of the year for the steakhouse, and I'm running the fry station there, and at one point, my dad comes up to me and slaps me on the back and says, "Mike, look." And there was a big line waiting that was out the door and kind of down the sidewalk a little bit. And I go, "Okay, yeah, I'm on it, Dad. I got it." And he goes, No, look." This was his chance to show me what this could be. And he goes, "Just look. Someday, all of this is going to be yours. And boy, and it's like, geez, Dad, we have to talk. Well, and I mean, he could tell that I wasn't thrilled by that, and it's like, Dad, I don't want to do this the rest of my life, and you're not going to be at the fry station forever. Soon there's beverages. You'll be cooking steaks someday, and someday you'll be running a cash register. And it's like, oh, okay, let's talk. And ultimately, we came to an agreement. It's like, give me 2 years to see if I can make it at Magic. If I can't, I'll come back and I'll work at the steakhouse. But I should at least give this a shot here after having invested so much time at the college and everything. Here's my best shot at doing something with Magic. And so we agreed that 2 years. Growing up in West Virginia, it was something really hard for my parents to understand or accept. They'd never seen anybody in show business. There's no theaters, and how do you make a living at Magic? All they could see and understand was there's birthday parties and there's school shows, but after you do a few of those, everybody in town's seen your show. Then what do you do? And I really had no idea if what I was doing was how it might compete in a larger market. And so I went to one of the SAM conventions a couple of months later and competed and won in close-up. And I said, well, that gives me this is encouraging to win this. This is a national competition. This kind of validates some of my beliefs. And from there, it was no turning back, because I was really passionate about it. And it wasn't that I didn't want to work. I was happy to spend all day reading and practicing and doing what I needed to do to become better as a magician. Pretty soon it became clear that I was making some headway with it. And I think it really helps to know what you don't want to do as well. And knowing what's waiting if this doesn't work. Puts everything into context. I think every kid should have a job at some fast food industry when they're in high school or college, so that their parents can tell them, okay, if you don't decide to become good at something, this is what you're going to be doing the rest of your life. Dad had no idea what a motivational speech that was when he came up to me. But it was the most motivational speech I ever heard. Someday all of this is going to be yours. It's like, okay, I get it.
It's great to have not only the chase to move forward, but also a pit waiting for you.
Right. I mean, it's like, if this doesn't work, you're back at the fry station, man. And
so help me understand where you started performing. Were you doing restaurants? Were you doing lots of public shows, private events? How did it move forward for you at that point?
Yeah, it was a lot of school shows that were there. And the one thing that I didn't do a lot of, because it just wasn't in that area, was see myself in a theater selling tickets. I wish I'd have been more in tune with. And also going to college. I studied business management in college. If I had known that I was going to go into Magic, I would have studied more theater and character development. I would have taken a different path, but I just realized that doing this for a living was an option. Yeah, and just shows and corporate shows, and then some trade shows came along. And interestingly enough, after winning the SAM thing, I got asked to do a few lectures, and that was such a revelation to me, that you could get together with a bunch of guys and just talk about Magic, and then they buy stuff off of you. It's like, wow, what a great thing this is. This is the best of both worlds. You get to perform, and then you get to talk about how cool it is. And, I just felt like a lecture should be as good as any show. It should be better than any show, because you get the best of both worlds. So there's no reason why a lecture shouldn't be entertaining in its own right. So yeah, I liked that idea. I was performing at colleges and became exposed to this idea of block booking, where you would go to these college kind of trade shows for college acts. These colleges would cooperate with each other to get a better price and to send you through to justify going to a certain area, and you do 3 or 4 of these colleges. I thought, well, this idea should work in magic. There should be these block booking things that take place in magic. That kind of became a new idea for magic lectures. Magic lectures at the time really weren't seen as anything more than just, hey, we'd like to have you come in. The idea of really working an area, all the clubs in an area at once really wasn't something that was happening on a big scale. So that kind of then turned lecturing into a bit of a market, more so than it was before.
So I want to get back to lecturing a little bit later. I want to touch on working with mentors. I know that you had an opportunity to study with Vernon. Were there anybody else that you studied with? And maybe what are some of the key lessons or key takeaways that still stick with you till today from working with the professor?
That was a fortuitous thing that developed. I really tried to pursue that relationship and would seek him out whenever he was at a convention, and started going to California to perform at the castle and spending some time with him. Prior to that, growing up in Virginia, really where you were hours from any magic shop, I developed this. This was an idea that came from Napoleon Hill, the guy that wrote Think and Grow Rich. The idea of creating this emulation board. He talked about his group of guys that he really respected in history, and he said, "Boy, what if you could sit down with Lincoln and Einstein and Edison and Tesla, and what would you say to them, and what would they say to you?" And he began to really try to imagine those meetings and try to imagine what these guys would say. And I said, well, I can do that for myself inside of magic. Here's a half dozen guys whose thinking I respect, whether it was Ed Marlowe and Guy Vernon and Harry Lorraine and Irv Weiner and a few others that at the time. And I said, well, why don't I meet with these guys regularly in my imagination and try to learn to think like they would think on a given problem? Because each of those guys really approached these things in a different way. Marlowe would think in terms of, how many different methods might there be for that? How many different ways could you accomplish the same thing? And in his books, here's 12 methods to accomplish this effect. And Irv Weiner was a very warm and personable and loving character. And how would he perform this in such a way that people really were drawn to it, and there was no ego involved, and the professor would come at it, approach it in a very natural way, so that it didn't seem like this is a processed magic performance kind of thing, but just a natural interaction. And I would try to imagine what each of them might say about something that I was working on. And it really trains you it trained me to think of each of these things in different ways. Let me look at it from this perspective. Okay, let me look at it from this perspective. Let me look at it from this perspective. And that was really helpful, just as an exercise in thinking in different ways. And you could do the same for yourself if you were to list some of the guys that you've told me that you've already interviewed, Juan or Paul Gertner, or some of these guys that, if you picked 5 of these guys and tried to approach a problem the way that you would imagine they would approach this problem. You don't really need to be born next to these guys or near these guys to really benefit from the way that they clearly approach something.
So not only did you have your own imaginary brain trust to help you work through these things, but then when you got a chance to meet some of them at conventions or in person or at the Magic Castle, I guess some of that hard work was able to really show that you were a dedicated student and that you cared and that you had put their thinking into practice already in some way. Is that what led to some of these relationships?
Yep, and I didn't realized at the time, looking back at it now, I kind of realized it's not that common for a young kid to come up to some of these guys at a convention and go, I've read your stuff, and I'd like to show you my approach to that, and show that I'd really studied their work and performed their stuff, and had some different thoughts on it. It was very interesting to these guys, and they would make a few comments back, and well, you could do this, and then I would see them again sometime in the not too distant future, and I would show them that I'd taken their advice to heart and applied it to some of these things. I mean, that was if somebody were to come up to me at a convention and show me these things and say, "Well, you're actually thinking about this stuff. You actually showed initiative. You've already spent time with this, and showed a willingness to think beyond the way it was published." It turns out to be, it's still not that common.
And it's a great secret for, not even a secret, but it's a great way to show your heroes and your mentors that you care about what they do, and they will show you that they care back. It's really profound with the internet the way that it is. It's so easy to reach your heroes, where not only can you have this mental exercise, but you can actually interact with these people, get feedback just by really showing them that you care and that you've put in the work.
Boy, it would be so interesting to approach all this the way it is today. At the time, back in the late 70s and early 80s and 80s and even the 90s, having access to these guys, it wasn't easy. Now the access, actually, everything has changed about magic. At the time, all these ideas were difficult to discover and difficult to get the information. And now, really, everything is just a search away. There's almost no secrets left, to discover through a process. In 1978, Fred Capps was lecturing in Washington, D.C. This was like 9-hour drive for me to go to see this lecture. But by golly, I'm going to go see this lecture, and I'm going to see Fred Capps, the world's greatest magician. And I drove to Washington and got a hotel and went to this lecture. And at one point in the lecture, it was a very good lecture. He's a great magician, but he made a coin vanish, and it was really gone. It's like, what the heck? And he said, it's a toppet, and just made one other thing vanish with it. And it's like, wow, that looks like magic. I want to learn that. So I really decided I want to find out what this thing is, and I want to learn to use it. And at the time, it's just a black bag that you would safety pin in your coat. It didn't take me long to say, well, gosh, it should be part of your coat. What if it's just kind of sewn in? And what if you didn't need these safety pins? What if you could just kind of tuck it in or something like that? And at one point, I thought I felt a coin in my pocket, and I reached in and go, oh, no, it's in the toppet. It occurred to me, oh, well, geez, what if I cut a slit here? Then I could reach into the toppet. And these were just really problem-solving things that turned out to be, in retrospect, I consider these to be obvious improvements.
Right.
That anybody is thinking about this, well, gosh, this has got to be simpler. This has got to be easier. I'm going to need some way to unload from this thing. And it turned out that, well, they're not that common, these ideas. But I've often wondered if I had just seen this coin vanish, on YouTube, would it have had the same impact on me as the way that it did if I had to drive, or was it the 9-hour drive that just primed my mind to just, I'm going to find something here that's going to justify this all-day drive to see this guy. So I just wonder if the access being so easy these days does, how that affects the experience of discovery and revelation and that sort of thing. So
even on what we've touched on already, like it's interesting the different unique things that motivate us, whether it's, an amazing magician being 10 hours away and going to see them, working on things to impress or showcase to a magician that you like, or just being afraid of going and having to work at a steakhouse. There's different things that motivate us.
Right. I mean, there's these motivations, just it's a complex formula to, creates motivation and inspiration. I used to think, boy, if only I could be at the Magic Castle and see what these guys were doing and hear what they were talking about. So when I finally had the chance to go and just hang out there, I would sit with the professor and I would just try to listen to everything that he said and every observation he made about what I was doing, and I would go back to the hotel and I would write down everything he said, and then I would try to, now what's he really mean by this, and how can I apply this? And tomorrow night, when I want to show him, I thought about what he said, and I've applied what he said, and tomorrow night I'll show him. Again, it must have been interesting to see some kid that's really willing to listen and practice and spend hours working on this stuff and come back the next day and show progress.
And you compare it to flying across the country to spend time with someone to now where you might spend $3 or $5 on a lecture online, and how maybe just even the value of those things in our mind, the perceived value, might affect how hard we work on things. Is there anything specific that you really remember as a message or an important idea that's really stuck with you from the professor that we can use today?
A lot of the things that he would say almost become cliches, about being natural and use your head and things like that. But yeah, there were very clear pieces of advice that would come out that, were strictly the process of asking about it and then trying to dig for information. And one thing, for example, the idea of after you palm a card, that the hand should lose its energy and drop with kind of a little bounce, as opposed to just said, I'm trying to say, well, what's the best way to hold it in your hand? How should the hand look? What's the best way to get it in there? And he made the point, so there's a lot of ways to do that, and getting it in there isn't the most important thing. It's after it's in there. What does your hand do? What does your arm do? He says, your arm moves in a different way when it's holding something than it does when it's empty. When it's empty, it kind of drops with a dead weight and kind of a little bounce at the bottom, if you've disconnected from it. And that little kind of a Vernon bounce thing, that really came out of an evening of talking about palming. And what's the best way to conceal that and to do it deceptively. And that little Vernon bounce thing is, I've never seen it in print any place yet. Because I've talked about it, I've now heard it and seen it and referenced in other lectures and books and things like that. And it's just interesting to think that that's a little tidbit that required countless hours, weeks, or years of just observation to really understand. To say, oh, here's what, look what this guy does when his hand's empty. It moves in a different way. That's one of the ideas, that it's small in its own way, but I just don't know that it ever would have been recorded and passed on if not for sitting down and spending an evening, talking about the various ways to palm and the various techniques for left and right-handed palming, and top of the deck and bottom of the deck and middle of the deck. And it took several hours of talking about that one thought before that one little tidbit came out, for after the palm. I mean, I still find myself realizing I've got to apply that after this transfer, whether it's for a ball with the cups and balls or something like that. It's kind of a universal shift of energy that takes place in so many things with magic, false transfers or palms or whatever.
I want to talk a little bit about the scripting and the words that you say when you're performing. There's a lot of different approaches to the world of scripting, maybe saying things about the world, metaphoric scripting, different things like that. One thing that I've really noticed about your performances is, number one, they are precise, well-delivered lines at well-delivered moments, but also it seems like the focus of the words that you're saying is on the clarity of the magic, on what is going on, what people are seeing, what they're about to see, and what they just saw. Do you have any theories or approaches to your scripting and what you say when you perform?
One thing I noticed over the years is when I sit down to write a script, I always write more words than I feel like saying when I'm standing in front of an audience. What happens when I'm sitting and writing a script and when I'm standing and delivering it, I've just found that I always overwrite and find myself eliminating things once I'm standing in front of an audience. To a certain extent, for me, it seemed ultimately became more effective to kind of get an idea of what I want to say and find a way to perform it. Everybody needs someplace to be bad. If I find it a way to perform it in an appropriate venue for learning and see what else I need to write to fill in the gaps and to emphasize certain points. That experience in front of the audience really helps. But if I sit down and try to really think of all the relevant things that I could say when I'm performing it, it almost always turns out to be too much.
Right.
It always did turn out to be too much. Even this last week or two, my wife Hannah, daughter of Francis Willard, and we're performing the Spirit Cabinet at It's Magic in a few weeks at the Magic Castle. And as the guy in front of the curtain, Glenn Falkenstein used to perform it with Francis Willard. The guy out in front of the curtain really has important stuff to say to emphasize what's happening, because the medium doesn't say anything. So it's really all up to that guy out in front to really hammer the impossibility of it and make it interesting and give it context. And again, sitting down to say, okay, I'm going to think of everything I can say about this. And once I was done, the script was probably twice as long as it felt comfortable saying. But it was good to have more to say than I ended up saying. It did help me eliminate the extra verbiage, but I had to end up doing it in front of an audience. I think really performing it in front of somebody is better than a week of rehearsing and a month of thinking about it. I learned more from one performance in front of a group and recording and videoing that and watching that and realizing, okay, I need to deliver this in a different way. Okay, here I'm not really emphasizing this in a strong enough way. And here, I'm standing there and saying two sentences while nothing is happening. And I'm always self-conscious about that. I really try to approach this, with a short attention span. If you can just imagine the audience has a sign on their forehead that they can light up, and that sign says, "So what?" I always imagine the audience is just on the verge of pushing that "so what" button on their foreheads, and so I don't want to give them much time to do that. And so I try to be very concise and not, spend so much time saying extra stuff. Living on the cusp of this "so what" experience really helps make a performance concise and really strive to make everything meaningful.
Totally. I was thinking the word that was jumping out to me before you said concise was almost a minimalism or minimalistic approach towards scripting. And you end up, just like in school, when you have to write, the shorter the paper is, the harder it is to figure out what are the important words to say and what are the important things that are worth mentioning. And you end up, by editing out all the things, all of those ideas that you came up with that are too much, you end up with really some of the best and strongest words that you could say to keep things important. I want to talk about some of the effects themselves. Before we get into specifics, one thing that really stands out with your magic is the visual nature of the magic, even years ago. Visual magic, this trend kind of popped up however long ago, or it at least became a more common verbiage to talk about magic. But so much of the magic that you do is literally eye-popping in ways that magic isn't today. Is there something that you keep in mind when you're selecting material, or is there something that sticks out to you or material that excites you?
I always felt like visual was really important. The more visual, the better that it is a visual art. And yet, over the years, I've grown to appreciate the cerebral side of it. One of the books that I read that was influential to me was Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. But I look at it and say understanding magic is a big part of it, because in a comic book, a typical format is these blocks of images that move a storyline forward. But he makes the point that the real magic in a comic book doesn't happen in those frames, but in the space between them. Because in the space between those blocks, there's a gap that the reader has to fill with his imagination. Good comics artist and writer understands the nature of those gaps and uses them in a way that makes the in story a collaborative effort. It is a combination between what they show and what they say and what you imagine. Typically, what you imagine is the most interesting part. And that's why anybody that's read the comic or read the book before they see the movie always feels like, the book was better or the comic was better. And the reason it was better is because it was a collaborative result.
Right, the empty space that we filled with our imagination.
Exactly, it was a participation. And so now I have a better understanding of the collaborative nature of a performance in the audience, and we're working together here to create an experience. And I'm trying to give them opportunities to use their imagination more and to put some pauses in to invite their imagination at that spot. Like, no, there's no way. No, it's more of a blend these days of inviting them to participate with their imagination and leaving room in there for their imagination, and then to follow up with most powerful visuals that I can come up with.
The appearance of the bottle before the coin and bottle comes to mind as something that uses that negative space, but then is like a mind-blowing, eye-popping visual.
And yeah, see, something like that, I used to just go straight into it. But now, before I do it, I position my hand and I tell them, watch. Boom, and then do it. So now they're watching and they're like, what? Boom. Oh, wow. It serves multiple purposes. I also think that doing something like that early in a show really conditions the audience to feel like, the next time he says watch, I'm going to watch, and to realize, things happen quickly and things happen visually. And if I don't pay attention, I'm going to miss something. And so I really try to condition the audience to expect surprises to happen quickly. If they're not paying attention, they'll miss it.
I want to talk about one of your television appearances, but really I want to talk about it as a lens to view selecting material and why some material would be selected. Your spot on the David Letterman show is, I would argue, one of the best spots that from any magician on any late night show. It's each trick you do is short, wildly impossible, and you've done that sort of thing over and over again on other late night shows as well. Just selecting the right material that is tight, concise, visually exciting. Do you have any advice for magicians who are either selecting material for television or just in general picking the right material to perform?
I did have a chance to watch several other performers in their set on the Letterman show, and to be able to say, okay, now stylistically, what's working here and what's not working. What I seem to notice is guys are trying to take their best trick and find a way to stuff it into that format where they're just sitting at the couch and he's over to the side. And to me, it didn't seem to work. The setting of the situation, where he is, where you are, and what that situation is it really conducive to your best tricks that you've developed for standing in front of an audience or performing at a table where everybody's looking forward and that sort of thing? And so I said, this isn't the right place for me to say I'm going to try to produce the bottle, or I'm going to try to do the cups and balls, or I'm going to try to do the Built a Lemon, or any of, some of my signature things. This is a jaded audience that's seen a lot of magic, and if you're putting cards on the thing, he's not going to be surprised if you turn them over and they're different. These multiple phase routines, he's hip to, and okay, is it over yet? Okay, now, okay, what?
Right, and he likes to poke at the magician a little bit.
Yeah, and so I said, I think short, quick, visual things that don't require me to kind of turn sideways to perform towards him. I watched other interviews with celebrities, and none of these celebrities sit there and turn sideways and sit awkward in this chair. What I tried to do was say, well, let me put this set together in my house and see what it's like, And okay, the table, he's got a desk here, and there's a chair here. Where's that chair in relation to that desk? Oh, if you try to rebuild that in your house, you realize, well, this guy is actually kind of sitting behind you to the left, and you're facing forward towards a camera. It's really difficult to do any standard magic effect in that format. And I just know everybody comes out and kind of turns towards him and starts performing. And I thought, well, it would be nice to walk out and just kind of sit down the way that these celebrities do and kind of talk forward. And in the end, it looked and felt different. And he responded to it in a different way. They actually edited out just a few sentences, but at the beginning, when I came out and just sat down, he went into his interviewing kind of things and talked to me. And what are you doing? It was because I didn't come out and hit that sideways performing setup. I would advise anybody, if they're getting ready to go on to any talk show, is to really think in terms of who those hosts are and what that setting is. And if you can, kind of rebuild that in your house and sit in it and say, what would be an appropriate effect to do?
Did you have a similar approach or some other thought patterns when you were going on Johnny Carson?
No, this was a learning experience after that, and I did get to control that situation. I did get to have a table and setting forward and kind of thing. So his thought was much like Merv Griffin's thought. I ended up doing 12 or 13 of the Merv Griffin shows before the Tonight Show, in that they want you to have a good show. Hey, if you have a good show, we have a good show. And what can we do to help you look the best that you can? Whereas Letterman, it's not that same attitude. His attitude was, hey, this needs to be interesting. Whether you look like an idiot or not isn't that important to him, as long as it's interesting. In fact, if you end up looking like an idiot, it's even more interesting to him. So they don't have that same kind of, hey, we want you to have a good show. Their attitude is, we want to have an interesting show. And if you can be interesting doing what you do, great. If in the end, it's more interesting for us to make you look like an idiot, then that's what we'll do. That's almost a unique perspective as far as my experience with television is concerned. In every other case, we want you to look good. That was less important to the guys on Letterman. We want an interesting show. We want the most interesting show we can put together.
I wanted to chat about, but you kind of put the name on it, which I think is a really easy lens to view it, which is signature pieces. It's really interesting to be able to see things like card on ceiling, cups and balls, certain stuff with, the top it, some thread magic. There are things that are synonymous with your name. Can you talk to me about this idea of signature pieces in Magic and how you decide to spend your time when you're working on something new versus honing even more a signature piece?
Well, one thing I noticed as time was going by is those things which became my signature pieces, for a chunk of time, they were always really easy to describe. Just like the floating bill, the pencil through quarter, the bill to lemon, the card on ceiling, all these things that really appealed to me. They all turned out to be really simple to explain and, boring names. Some guys, they have names of effects that you have no idea what this effect is from the name or what they call it or how they describe it. But for me, it was always just a 2 or 3 word description, and now you've got the idea. Played towards just clarity, simplicity. If it's easy to describe, if it's easy for somebody else to describe, then it's likely to be a good effect. Somebody sent me a Vernon quote just in the last couple of months. Here's a really funny quote. There's a site that collects magic quotes, and this quote from Di Vernon, where he said, if I could climax as many times as a Derek Dingle effect, I'd be a happy man. And I was like, oh, that's funny. I'm the one he said that to. Because I was doing rollover aces at the time. At the time, the professor, that's not my favorite trick. And I thought, no, but look, it's got this timing. It's got this, surprise, 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 surprise. And then and he said, well, if I could climax as many times as a Dingle routine, I'd be a happy man. And that's very funny. And consequently, that's a routine that it's not easy to describe. Rollover aces. He shuffles and they're face up and the face down, and he finds the 4 aces, and then the 4 aces turn out to have the royal flushes underneath, and then the deck is back in order and stuff like that. I really loved performing it. It was one of those things that I chose for my first Tonight Show appearance. It's appealed to me just from a presentation perspective and from the perspective combining that with the floating bill, for example. I thought I've got something that can't be done with skill and something that should make people say, boy, I'd hate to play cards with this guy, that seemed to demonstrate a lot of skill. And yet, as the years go by, it turned out to be an effect that I ended up to not feature anymore for various reasons. Probably the most important of it is it's flat on a table. And, only a few people can see it. It's a good television trick, but it's not something that an audience can really appreciate.
How does a trick become a signature piece?
As time goes by, you find yourself really being able to count on it, and you find that it proves itself. It's not audience tested; it's audience proven that this works for you. And just as time goes by, you find yourself continuing to go back to it. And I'd like to keep thinking about it. The Bill to Lemon I came up with another little important touch to it, just in the last couple of years. And that's after performing it for over 40 years. It's okay, yeah. Oh, you know what? How about this? This put me there even quicker. A lot of people, I think, have a tendency to find something that works, and then they don't mess with it anymore. It works, and why bother thinking about it? And yet, if you're willing to come back to it and say, no, really, what's working here, and how could this be even better and even clearer, and that these things evolve over time, and they continued. What you become content with are the accumulations of little incremental changes and little incremental improvements end up adding together. I mean, there's been people that haven't seen me perform, let's say, the cups and balls in 10 years. They see it again. They go, wow, you've really changed the routine a lot. Actually, no. It's really the same routine. I've just added little touches here and there, and stood at the table in a little different way, and reaching towards the balls in a different way, and pausing at different times. The next thing you know, it feels like a different routine, when really it's just been tiny, tiny little touches that developed over time. That's what, in the end, makes a signature piece, something that you've really spent a lot of time with and counted on in a lot of different situations. You've grown to trust as far as the audience is concerned, and be willing to continue to think about it.
I wanted to return to the topic of lecturing, but specifically magic teacher. You're regarded as one of the best magic teachers ever. You know, the easy to master card miracles are not only still foundational piece of educational content for people learning card magic, but it also continuously comes up as a place where amazing magicians today got started in really digging deep into the world of magic. Is there some important factors for teaching or for learning magic that you think are critically important?
What I'm happy about when we were doing all the videos and things like that is that there was the temptation to really try to do as much as possible, when really we tried to improve every time we went back into the studio. What can we do now that we didn't do before to make this just a more effective learning experience? I think that what really sustained those things is that we really tried hard to think of every possible way to make this more effective, more, as a learning device, and to select material that was effective, powerful. And we decided, when I say we, I'm talking about Louis Falenga, the owner of L&L Publishing, and myself. Whenever we looked at these things, it's like, we'll do them as long as we feel like the material holds up and is great material. And when we feel like we've said what we came to say, then we'll quit doing it. And each of the topics we try to say, okay, now what's the best way to approach this particular topic, whether it's cups and balls or coins or threads or whatever. We're able to spend a lot of time preparing for each one, time that you couldn't spend today because we ended up with a nice market and could say, look, we're going to spend a year getting ready for this next set of tapes, and have it kind of really justify that much time and effort. We decided we would rather try to maintain a standard and elevate a standard as much as possible. So it was a great experience. I loved immersing myself in these topics, and was able to do that longer than the average guy gets to do. The average guy, gets to immerse himself in the learning process for a period of time, but then he's got to go out and start making a living. I was able to say, I'm going to make immersing myself in these topics for 10 years beyond when the average guy got to do it, because I was assimilating that information and trying to put it together in accessible ways. And there was a market that, I would have to say, though, near the end, it became less satisfying in that it became less about what we were doing with the medium and the topic. It became less important than the fact that I was doing it. And the reviews and things like that became more about me than about the content. And it's like, that was disappointing, because I just like to see, I consider that the least important thing than the topic and the approach and the way we've kind of delivered the material. And that's the nature of the beast, though, in a small industry. Once you have a certain body of work out there, it It becomes more about the guy than the topic. And I thought that that's unfortunate because we're really trying to do interesting things. And if they just focus on those interesting things, then other people will try to up their game to include these things.
And I think that's exactly what happened. The innovation in that world has not only inspired a lot of the teaching that happens today, but also there's still, like I mentioned, foundational elements and tools that I would recommend to anyone to this day who is like getting started in, let's say, card magic, for example. I could easily recommend some easy to master card miracle videos. So really stood the test of time.
And from our perspective, if we picked good topics and we did it right, then it would have a really long shelf life. And that helped as far as justifying the effort that went into it. These days, the shelf life of a new product is 2 weeks. I mean, these guys are Penguin and Vanishing Ink are doing, emails almost every day. And so the life cycle on a new product now is just so short that I just don't see how it justifies putting a lot of effort into it. And that's why these things are considered more consumables than they are library pieces. They're not meant to last on somebody's library shelf and become a reference work. This is meant to be a consumable. I'm going to watch this trick today, and tomorrow we'll see what else they got.
The world is definitely changing, the world of magic along with it. We are now nearing the end of the episode, and with each episode we have a bunch of wrap-up questions that are asked to each and every guest. The first is the endless chain. So in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest who would be fantastic on the show. There's of course one catch and one challenge. The challenge is with over 200 episodes, it has become more and more challenging to find people that have not been on the show. And the catch is that you have to be able to potentially put us in contact. You can't just recommend David Copperfield. So who do you think would be a fantastic guest to be featured on this show?
I tell you somebody that a good friend that's doing a lot of great things with magic is Jeff Kaler. He came out with a TKO a number of years ago, kind of like the Coatless Toppet, the Unbelievalope, and he's doing a lot of speaking now, but also still a lot of magic, and is just one of the really great networkers that probably the best networker I've ever seen as far as just meeting people and engaging with new clients. And he's out in LA now. He was here in Orlando for 8 or 9 years. He's one of the guys that makes a point of going to the Magic Castle regularly and and taking people downstairs and performing 4 or 5 sets for different people and just being a really nice guy, and consequently is getting lots of contacts, maybe more contacts than anybody I know from just performing at the castle.
Well, that's a fantastic recommendation. Thank you for that. The next one, which I feel like we have skimmed the surface of this a little bit, but it's about modern magic. As we've touched on quite a few times, the world of magic has been changing and growing, and in some ways for the better, and some ways for the worse. What's one thing going on in the world of magic right now that you like, and one thing going on in the world of magic right now that you don't like?
Well, coincidentally, it's the same thing. It's really not easy to know what's going to catch on and become a trend. I remember seeing Dan and Dave Buck at Magic Live many years ago, and there was very heavy flourish stuff going on, and thinking to myself, well, I just wonder, what kind of marketplace that'll ever have. And it turns out, well, that's a huge market. And, just by being true to themselves, they have developed a huge following and a huge influence on the world of magic. And this extreme flourish thing has ended up creating the nice deck market, which is probably the most important market in magic now. I would never have seen coming, 30 years ago, if you'd have told me that, just selling decks of cards is going to be a big part of the market. I would never have guessed that. I would never have seen that coming. And yet, again, just by being true to their brand, and they've really had a huge influence. But specifically, more currently, the idea of performing just for the camera, like Shen Lim is really I would have thought that would have been a really limiting choice to become good at just performing for the camera. And yet that has worked really well for him. To me, that would have been a scary choice in that, well, if you really just kind of play to the camera, why would they ever need to see you live? They could always just watch you on YouTube if it's really just a screen experience. And although I haven't seen him live, I've heard that, if you're in a relatively small room and he's performing and there's a monitor, he'll tell you, watch the monitor. But you're right here. Why would I watch the monitor when you in 3D is right here? So I play to the camera, and I would never have expected that to have gone as well as it did. It's been wildly successful to him, to which I'm very happy, because there was no evidence that was going to be a huge market. But again, just by being true to what he wanted to do and trying to become really good at what he wanted to do, he's basically, I don't know if he created the market so much as really validated it. But he's now very successful. He's got a show in Vegas. He's knocked it out of the park on America's Got Talent. And, God bless him for really having his own vision of what he wanted to be. Yeah.
The second last thing is the take-home point. So people have been listening to us talk about magic for over an hour now, and there's many different bits and pieces that could be wildly important. This was an amazing interview. Is there one thing, or if there was one thing that people thought back to when they thought about this episode, one idea or one important take-home point, what would that idea be?
Just the idea that, like myself, I started out in West Virginia, where I had no access to all this stuff, but was able to, just in my imagination, participate with the minds that inspired me inside of magic. And it does not matter where you are. You can do everything that you want to do in magic, and you can really benefit from all the knowledge that's been accumulated in our art form over the years. And even if you don't have direct access to people that inspire you, you can still learn to think like they do and have their approach influence what you do.
I love it, and I love that strategy of thinking what these mentors, what these amazing teachers and magicians that we know, what they might think and what they might say. I think that's super valuable. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. Where can people find you if they want to learn some of your materials, see you perform, anything like that? Where can they interact with you?
My website is michaelammarmagic.com. We have a digital download site where we put a lot of the magic from the Easy to Master series as individual downloads. It's called worldsgreatestmagic.com, and you can watch the effects performed and then download the secret if you like it. We just don't promote it a lot, but everybody that ends up discovering it just really considers it to be a great resource. worldsgreatestmagic.com or michaelammarmagic.com. And yeah.
With that, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. This was fantastic. I know I learned a lot, and I know that definitely the listeners will learn a lot from this as well. So sincerely thank you for spending the time with me and sharing your magic.
Thank you, Jonah. Well done, my friend.
Thank you. And of course, a big thank you to everybody at home who listened, learned, and is going to put some of this stuff into action. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next Thursday. Peace. Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. As always, if you think that the things in this episode should be heard by other magicians, your friends, people in your community, people in your magic club, people on magic Facebook groups or forums that you think need to hear about this, please share it, spread the word. It is the only way that people get access to these 200 plus magic lessons from the best magicians on the planet. That's thanks to you and the way that you share it and spread the word. So thanks for being here. Thanks for spreading the word, and I'll see you next Thursday.